Yo, what's up guys? Mike Thomas, aka the Young Trishula here with the Caster's Corner. That is right, we are one of the 4 members. I think this is the first video I'm properly making like myself for the channel. If you don't know who I am, I appeared in Elestrals Season 2 on Team Imperawat, and you might also recognize me if you're a fan of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game, as I am currently one of the North American representatives for the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship. Go check that out if you are a Yu-Gi-Oh! Player. But if you're not, no worries, because that's not what we're talking about today. We are talking about the Elestrals Daybreak metagame. So if you're unaware, on the first episode of the Expend to Draw podcast, which was the previous video on this channel, it's kind of become a meme that I just hate every deck. I think every deck is bad. So here's what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to be going through about 20 or so decks from Daybreak, and we're going to be rating them. We're doing a tier list. It's a tier list video, and I'm going to be letting you know which decks I think are actually bad and which ones I think are actually pretty good, so that you don't wind up playing one of the bad decks. We're going to be hopping into the tier list now. So I've broken these down into good decks up here at the top. These are decks that I think are genuinely good, like decks that are probably contenders for like the best deck. Solid picks, you know, something that might not be the best deck, but, you know, respectable deck that you can go into a tournament with, expect to do decently well. Rogue decks, maybe, you know, these are kind of like your off-the-wall kind of picks. Decks that you might see success with, you might not. Kind of a hit-or-miss decks. Decks that I think are objectively bad. I think that, like, if you are queuing with these decks, you're not going to have a great time. You're more likely to do poorly than to not do poorly. And then decks that are just straight up trolling. Like, I mean, if you enter with this, you're expecting to go like 0-3 drop and just have a good time. So let's get into that. The first one of these decks I think is probably gonna fit the meme of probably bad tier, maybe rogue tier, and that's gonna be Frost Nexus. I'm not sure where I want to put it between these two. I'm gonna give it rogue. This might drop down to bad tier later. I'll go back through and reevaluate at the end. Frost Nexus just isn't really there yet. It did get a new card in Brimmelinks, which defines the archetype separate from stuff like Morfrost, which is kind of what Frost was doing before. It was either Morfrost or Shiver Roar. Frost Nexus kind of somewhere in the middle of those strategies. I think the biggest problem with it is Frost doesn't have that many good receivers. You have Catarant, which is a heal, but most of the other Nexus archetypes also have a heal. It's not really gaining anything over playing any of the other decks. Unfortunately, you don't fix any of Frost's issues dealing with bigger bodies by playing these new Nexus like strategies. So I think it's in about exactly the same position it was before. I don't think this deck is like just straight up bad, but it's not great. It might drop down to bad tier. It's somewhere in here. I'll put it at a comfortable rogue for right now, but this might surprise you. Second deck, we haven't even put anything in bad or trolling yet. Second deck, good deck. This deck, Win Nexus. Win Nexus or Win Burn. I think that this deck is actually very, very solid. They got new cards in Toxic Swarm. There's also the Verituka line. Those cards are very solid as well. And I think that this deck is just very open. It does a lot of things right. Maybe over time this will drop down to solid tier depending on how the meta shakes up. But this deck is kind of got everything it needs to have. Like, it has a good engine. It has good, you know, like face burn, which is in this game always very good. The synergy between Aeolus, Elichick, the toxic cards, and Xaltis, all very solid. The ability to be able to just play an Elichick on turn 1 and then play Aeolus and search into either Toxic Swarm or Exaltair, whichever you don't have, and then, you know, play a Toxic Swarm, burn your opponent for 1, play Exaltair on the following turn, and then just Nexus, and then you're burning for 3 more damage, plus swinging for upwards of 4 on that turn is incredibly hard to deny. Very, very solid. Do I think that this deck is like the best deck in the room? Probably not, but I do think it does have very favorable matchups into what some of the other decks are. I do think it has bad matchups into some of the other good decks, but I think that this deck is definitely very solid. Definitely cannot be slept on because it's solid. I think this is just a very good deck. I know I called it solid. Maybe it belongs to solid tier, but I think it's good. I think this deck is good. We will add a deck though to counterbalance thing to trolling tier, and unfortunately, this deck is bad. This deck is very bad. This makes me really sad because I was in love with these cards when they got revealed. I really thought that there was going to be something to them. Unfortunately, it just does not feel like there is. It's not that good. Unfortunately, you just apply no pressure. You lose to common cards like Dense Fog, Gorgon's Gaze, not drawing the combo. Unfortunately, these cards are just not very good. I don't think a deck built around Follow the Wisps is doing anything. I do think that there's maybe potential for this as like a splash package and something else, but like there's better stuff to do. This is just trolling. Bears. I think bears actually rogue tier. This is like a proper rogue tier. Maybe this should come down to like differentiate like how I feel about this, but optimistically I would actually say bears rogue tier. Bears were kind of considered trolling, you know, like these cards are like bad. Like all the bears are too little. They don't really do much of anything. Like a weird color and fire. But I think that Don't Poke the Bear, one of the new cards that bears get in Daybreak, is actually really solid. That it's a very solid battle trick that this deck has access to, which is uncommon in Daybreak. It's kind of similar to Argo, where it's like, you know, you have to risk attacking into dudes all the time because like they might just get huge and then you die. So that's always scary. I do think it's telegraphed, which I don't think allows it to go up into like solid tier or anything like that because of the potential telegraph. Like, you know that there could be a Don't Poke the Bear down there. If there's a bear on your opponent's field, like why else would they be playing bears? But I think that bears actually like could do well, or at least better than you might expect, like better than trolling tier. So this is my optimistic pick. I think bears there's something to it. So if an opponent plays a bear against you, don't be too surprised. Another trolling candidate. This is Mill. I chose Humburst for the picture. This would also include stuff like Ruminous Mill, Avalanche Mill, stuff like that. These decks are troll. Unfortunately, even with the support of Daniel A Drive, Mill is just objectively not that secure of a game plan in like these types of card games because you're investing too much into just trying to deck out your opponent. I don't think we have the tools there yet to support something like Humburst, which just is a 2-drop that blows itself up to mill 6 cards. I don't think we're at a point in the game where we can really support that. Lumaru being a 5 that can mill the opponent is cool, but you know, you still have to connect and kill opponents' Elestrals to mill them, which doesn't feel great. At that point, you may as well just play 5s, and you're probably just going to win on beatdown playing in that strategy before you ever mill them out. I don't think that a mill strategy is really there. I think that it's still kind of troll. This one's going to be fun. Morfrost bad form. It's going in bad tier. This is bad. I do think that in terms of Frost decks, it's probably one of the better options that you have. I do think that Frost Nexus is potentially a little bit better. That's why I have Frost Nexus up here in Rogue, because I think that anything that can like successfully Nexus and like has a game plan built around Nexusing has more room for skill expression than just playing stats every turn. Potentially a better like deck construct up here. But the problem with Morfrost expends a lot of spirits to not be able to deal with a 5. And it gets even worse in the new set with cards like Dense Fog and the upcoming Artemis. That's just not good. Like, they're not good enough. Like, if they could get over a 5 body consistently, yeah, they'd awesome. Great cards. I would love them. They don't do that, though, unfortunately. Morfrost just cannot get over the number 5. And unfortunately, Morfrost bat form did not fix that. I think that Morfrost bat form is Morfrost bad form. So hopefully, you know, maybe we'll get more Morfrost cards in the future that do fix some of the deck's problems, and we will see it rise in the ranks. But unfortunately, it's still just too much investment for too little payoff. And I think it's actually gotten even worse than it was in Frostfall metagame, where it significantly underperformed against most people's expectations, I would say. Golden Fleece. So I have this separated out as like specifically like decks built around Golden Fleece. So there's like the whole like sub theme in Solar of like Cyphermall, Golden Fleece, and Guardian of the Fleece. And I guess you can rope Heliolith in there too. Like, I think this deck is trolling. I think, well, I'll put it above trolling. I'll put it in bad tier. It's not good. It's really not good. I wanted it to like be good, but it wasn't. I really like Golden Fleece as an equipment. I do think that Golden Fleece is probably the best equipment in the game. Like, it's one of the few equipments that does what I want it to do, like, consistently, which is, you know, get a dude to stick on the board or like something like that. But unfortunately, it's still expensive to not really do too much. You know, you're just providing a little bit of protection for a guy which is sometimes nice, but not consistent enough to be viable, I think. It's just too expensive. It's doing too much. Sure, Guardian of the Fleece is cool, but you have to have this face up. Your opponent can just Earthquake your dude, remove this. Cypher Maul is still a 4, so it's still getting traded over by any aggressively statted Elestral. So it's just not very strong. Unfortunately, I think that there's just much better things that you could be doing. Similarly, Chronodile down in bad tier. Chronodile is interesting. I think that like there's an argument that it could come up like not to solid, to rogue tier maybe. I know a lot of people have been trying out Chronodile, and some people have been liking it. Like I really think that it's valid that some people are liking it, but what I think that people are liking more is the Water Nexus portion of Chronodile. I don't think that people like Chronodile. Chronodile is bad. Like I think that it's too much investment, and what's going to end up happening, and I've seen happen very often, is you set up a Chronodile, and then you have like a 3 or 4 material Chronodile, and you have like a Zeus with like 3 or 4 spirits under it, or not a Zeus, Poseidon, and the Poseidon gets hit with like Lavalith or Thunderstorm or anything, and then this gets Earthquaked, and then you feel really silly. Cards like Heliolith just bypass its protection and remove it from the board completely, and now you're down like 8 spirits. Yeah, this card is about as good as Centarbor, but Centarbor is kind of better. Like and think about that. We're comparing this card to Centarbor, and I'm pretty positive that Centarbor is better. Unfortunately, Chronodile not too strong. I think it's just too expensive. I do think that there is something to Water Nexus. I don't think I put like Water Nexus specifically on here. I'll talk about it more, I guess, with Rock in a Hard Place. Yeah, I think that this is bad, but I think the Water Nexus stuff is maybe more valid than this. Okay, this one's gonna be interesting. I'm gonna put Rhinosect into Rogue tier. So Rhinosect is a really interesting deck. I'm not really sure what the best way to play this deck is. I think that there is a possibility for Rhinosect to do okay. I don't think I would like personally be signing up with Rhinosect, but I wouldn't be shocked if somebody brings a really crazy Rhinosect deck out and does well with it, because I think that Rhinosect as a card is a little unsupported, but is really strong. Just being able to drop like a 2 spirit, like 8 attacker, potentially for free onto the board is really scary in theory. And I've seen some builds of like Rhinosect that kind of just look like either a worse Windburn or a worse 5s deck, and they just have Rhinosect in there. That could be solid. Like I think that again, it's still like a less refined version of another archetype, but I do think that Rhinosect like as a card is solid. So I think that a deck using him could perform well. I would put it in Rogue tier for now. Maybe this is the future, but I don't think so. I think that this is Rogue, but still better than some of these other decks. I'm going to say Argo. I'm going to put Argo decks into solid tier. This one's really interesting because I think that Argo is actually very bad. It's really funny. I would put Argo decks down into bad tier, or not Argo decks, but like Argo cards into bad tier. But I think that Argo decks are potentially solid. I think that there is merit to playing Argo because I do think it is a bit of a jump scare. Like I think it's better than some of the other things that you can be doing, but I do think it's really expensive. I don't think I would call it like particularly good. I think that there's a wide range of decks that could be considered Argo decks, and some of them are pretty solid, some of them are pretty bad. So I think I would put this in solid tier for some of like the better versions of Argo decks, but I don't think that this is like ever going to be top tier. I think that like people will do well with this card. I don't think that it's like the best things that you can be doing. I think that there's better things. I think it's a bit of a trap, and I think it will fall off over time, probably down to here. At outset, it's solid, and I think it's going to drop down. I'm also going to put Vesuvatuga up here into solid tier. Solid, I think, is going to be like decks that you're going to see, not necessarily like decks that I would respect too hard. That's I think how we're gonna approach solid tier. Vesuvatuga is interesting. I think that this deck was really scary at first. Like when I first saw these cards, I really thought that this was gonna be up here. I really thought that there was like an eruption like burn deck that was going to like ruin the game or whatever, but the more I've played against it, the less scared I am of it. Vesuvatuga itself is not particularly scary. The idea of like summon Scavicole and search 2 eruptions is really scary. Like, that's terrifying, and I think that alone can put this deck up into solid tier. Like, you can just get jump scared by it. I don't have as much confidence in this deck as I would anything else. You know what? Actually, I think in talking about this, I'm gonna move these two both down to Rogue, because I think we kind of like backloaded the good decks. I'm going to move these down here cautiously. I'm going to put them closer to the top end. I might do a little bit of restructuring towards the end. But yeah, I think that Vesuvatuga is just unfortunately not it. I don't think it's it, but like I think that like people will play it. I do think that you will get Eruption burned at least once, but I think best of 3 really hurts this deck because I don't think it's consistent enough. I think something people also glossed over is that Boltuga expends to search Eruption, which doesn't feel good, which does not feel good. But I do want to just like mention, because I talked about it before, this is one of the decks that I think could benefit from Follow the Wisps potentially, just as a way to ensure that you're getting Scavicle onto the board and being able to search your Eruptions. I don't think that this is like the play. It's better than I would have expected. All right, so the next deck I want to talk about is I'm going to refer to this as Water Nexus. I used Rock in a Hard Place as the picture, but I think that I probably should have separated these out. Rock in a Hard Place, I'll just say right now, I think that that's troll. I think that the Rock in a Hard Place stuff is a little bit troll, but I do think that there's maybe some merit to like a Water Nexus or like just a water control deck. And I'm going to put that in solid tier, I think. I think that that stuff is pretty solid, and I think that that is what is leading people towards decks like Chronodile and stuff like Rock in a Hard Place. I think that Water did get good tools in stuff like Eddy. Like, Water now has decent offensive dudes. Small Tuga into Search Nekruff into Search Galaxy is still one of the best starts in the game, you know, when you go uninterrupted, though it is a lot worse now because of cards like Dense Fog. I think it's solid. I don't think I would put it up here, though. I don't think it's as good as people are thinking that it's going to be. I think that has more merit than some of these other decks, but I would hesitate to call this like a top tier deck. I will put Fives up in top tier though. This shouldn't come as a surprise. Fives strategy I think is very, very solid because it's kind of hard to like beat just playing efficient dudes every single turn. I think playing efficient dudes every turn is just a really good strategy right now. I do think that this deck will fall down, though. I'm going to put it in good deck tier for the start of Daybreak meta. It's going to fall down, though. And you know what? Actually, just for the thumbnail, I'm going to put it down here. I'm going to put it down here because my thoughts on like the Fives deck is really interesting. I think that Fives is like solid. It's hard to deny the game plan of Fives, in that like you're just playing a good stat line every turn and telling your opponent, deal with my stat line. Like, that is objectively never like a bad plan. The problem with Fives is that it doesn't give your opponent much room to make mistakes. Fives is very straightforward in what it wants to do. You play a 5, you attack with the 5. I look at my back row and I say, oh, do I have a counter? Oh, I'll counter rune this. I'll shield this. I'll tsunami this. I'll whatever this. You know, it's really straightforward. There's like, it is very brain off, head empty gameplay. And I don't think that that is the type of gameplay that will consistently lead you to success in Daybreak meta. I think it worked in Frostfall because Frostfall meta was largely balanced around Thunder Nexus being a good deck. I think Frostfall had a lot of optimism for Morfrost, and when Morfrost did not, you know, really succeed, I think that Fives just kind of took over. But, you know, we even saw that in late Frostfall metagame, players like Bean Soldier were taking decks like Earth Nexus, decks, you know, like decks that I think can Nexus and can do interesting things, I think will perform better at a higher level than decks like Fives. But I think that you can't really go wrong with Fives, especially if you're newer to the game. I think that this is like a very easy deck to just pick up and go play with and do well with. Like, I think that this can't go lower than solid tier, but I don't think that in the long run it's going to be top tier. I think in the short run, it is top tier though. Like, short run, top tier, long term, solid tier at best. Another interesting one is Thunder Nexus. Thunder Nexus did get some new tools that were potentially super scary, like cards like Arcolith, and it also got cards like Fulguries, which I think make this deck playable. I don't, however, think this deck is very good. Unfortunately, I'm going to put this in bad tier. This is kind of like a subset in my mind of Argo, because I think that this deck predates on people playing into Argo, and I don't think that Argo is particularly strong. So I think that Thunder lost its best Nexus user in Sparkit, And unfortunately, without ways to trigger the Ass Rabbit consistently, it's just not that strong. Again, there's better things that you can be doing. You do have stuff like Larva Cell that could be splashed, but unfortunately, you're just not applying pressure. You're not generating the value that you want to be generating by playing Thunder Nexus. I think the best thing that Thunder can do is just hope that your opponent plays into an Argo or something, and you're able to jump scare them by making a Fulguri's bigger than it looks, and then your opponent lets you Argo, and then they Dense Fog you, and then they kill you, and you've lost like 4 or 5 spirits. So unfortunately, I don't think that this is very strong. I do think that like it might see some like rogue success at first, but I think that this deck is bad. There is stuff with Thunder that I think the Thunder cards themselves, especially Arcalith, I think do show potential. I don't think it's going to be in like a traditional Thunder Nexus deck though. I think that this deck is going to have to kind of find a new identity in Daybreak, and it's not Thunder Nexus. With that said, I will put Apollo into S tier, or into good tier. Now this is probably another like subversion of what people think. I know a lot of people are kind of feeling that Solar's not very good right now, and I've heard that sentiment a lot. I don't know where that sentiment's coming from. Solar has felt crazy in my testing. Solar has felt very, very good. It's taken a while for me to like get there though. I think the problem with Solar that I've seen from a lot of deck lists that I've looked at, because I've messed around with a lot of Solar. I think people are getting a little too lost in the sauce with some of the Solar cards. I think this deck needs like to be very, very tight. I think this deck is good. I don't think that a lot of people have it figured out yet, but you know, from my testing, this deck has been overperforming like crazy. I would even go as far to say that this is probably the best deck in the game by quite a long shot. It feels like Thunder Nexus, like genuinely in terms of its power level. This deck is very good. It does not have bad matchups, and I think that that's really the thing that makes it shine, is that its worst matchup is probably just 5s. Like it's just sometimes the number 5 can be frustrating, but this deck can deal with it better than you might think. It's solid. Like it's really a solid deck, dude. Like it's really, really good. I would probably put this up here. I think that this deck is really good. This is also why I think that the Windburn strategy is potentially good, is that the Burning Spirits can be good into decks that sometimes play at a slower pace like Solar can. But I think that in at least early meta, that I think a lot of Solar players that you're going to play against are going to fall down into bad tier. But I would be scared of this deck. I would explore this deck more. It's very, very good. This deck is crazy. Another deck that I think is also crazy that I don't see as many people talking about is Earth Nexus. Very similar to what Josh just won with in late Frostfall metagame. This deck is really solid. It didn't lose anything, and it got actually some new cool tools in Mud Sorlet. Earth is starting to look like it could potentially be the best deck. So I think that these are like the good decks. Like I think that you should really watch out for. And I think that they're going to maybe create a little bit of a triangle between themselves as to which ones are the best. I think that these are the decks that are competing to be better than 5s. Let's put it that way. I think 5s is the best non-Nexus based strategy. I think that the Nexus strategies are all better than 5s, just fundamentally. I think that 5s is always going to be good though, and frankly, like I think that it'll go back and forth. I do think that 5s has lost stuff though, in that the crabs aren't very good anymore, but Earth Nexus has gained a lot of tools, and I think Earth Nexus deals with the 5s matchup probably the best, because you do have cards like Mudlet now, and Mudlet is able to kind of like be an eddy that can eddy multiple times. There's been a lot of talk about eddy. Love Edward, but Mudlet in some ways is a better eddy, and having the ability to, you know, run out an Equilinx plus Demeter, apply a ton of pressure by popping back row and then trading over, you know, basically every 1-drop stat line in the game, and then, you know, setting your own back row to secure that board state, then, you know, dropping a Mudlet to switch a position of an Elestral and then do it again while popping back row is very, very solid. That cannot be denied at all. That is very, very good. So definitely something to keep your eye on. And it's already starting to see results as well. I did give a Earth Nexus list to PK Sparks, and he just ran the list, you know, that I built card for card, and he 3-0'd his local tournament, like very little resistance from what he said. So this deck definitely is very scary. I would definitely respect Earth Nexus a lot. So definitely watch out for that. Another deck that has not seen as much discussion as you might think, but you know, it's out there. Like it's definitely a deck to consider, is Phosphocell. I think Phosphocell is trolling. So kind of expanding on my Thunder Nexus thoughts, Phosphocell I feel like is the bad variant of Thunder Nexus, which I've already put in bad. So I think that Phosphocell is not very good. Yeah, it's just too expensive. It is cool that you can get out such a big dude so quickly. I think that that is really strong, but I think the problem with it is that there's just better things you can be doing. I think that, you know, it is too easy to just play into back row in this format, and, you know, investing everything into the Phosphocell just to eat a shield or something, it was never going to feel good. Unfortunately, Phosphocell only just gets big. That's the only thing it does. While I'm saying that, I think that there are ideas here. I do think a Thunder Solar hybrid could eventually be good. Like, I think that, like, maybe the code hasn't been cracked yet, but I think for now it's just trolling. Not something I would really worry about in like a tournament. Another deck that is trolling is unfortunately Pharaohgeist, but I do think that Pharaohgeist itself is an extremely underrated card. I think that a lot of people think that Pharaohgeist is a burn Elestral. It is not a burn Elestral. It is not a stall Elestral. This is an aggro Elestral. It is the perfect aggro Elestral, actually. And I think that we are starting to see that now that we've seen some more of the Lunar cards being revealed. Lunar's whole thing seems to be, they're kind of like our mono red. Almost like they are just really, really good in the battle phase. I think that Pharaohgeist very much encapsulates that, and I think if there was a good way to get Pharaohgeist on the board, I think this card would be really good. But unfortunately, there's just not a way to get it out yet, because there's like three Lunar dudes in the game, and like I don't think any of them are good. Sorry, Specterus, I think you suck. But you know, people are gonna disagree with me on that because people are still playing crabs. So. Yeah. I think the last deck is Wasp Ivy. I'm going to put it here in solid tier. So if you haven't played against this deck before, Wasp Ivy is kind of like a burn deck, but it's a really consistent, it's like half burn, half towers deck. I think that this deck alone is the reason that I am not putting Argo into like bad tier, because this deck pulls up the average of Argo decks overall. Wasp Ivy is really scary because Psychic Nectar can ascend into Wasp Ivy from deck whenever certain cards are played. I think it's Poison Nectar, Poison Tip Arrow, and Poison Tunic. So that's actually more common than you would think. You know, PTA is a very common back row. Like, everything plays PTA. Argo into Poison Tunic. Great. Awesome. You now have a Wasp Ivy on the field. This thing's huge. It's hard to get over. It burns you on top of that. And on top of that, too, you can also Argo into like a Bag of Winds or a Golden Fleece or something and make this card just like impossible to kill or remove. This deck is very scary, but I do think it has counters. I do think it has outs. I don't think it's the best deck in the room, but it's definitely something to watch out for. And I think it definitely competes with some of these other decks, and I think everything in these I think that this is kind of like the gatekeeper deck, I would say. If your deck can't reasonably deal with Wasp Ivy, don't play it. Like I think that is the bar here, is like if you're, so all of these decks kind of have a common theme, is like they're all going to get out-competed by a Wasp Ivy. These decks all can probably deal with Wasp Ivy pretty well. And I think that is its role in the metagame, I would say, is kind of just to gatekeep lower tier strategies from getting too far. I do think it has promise. I don't think it's the best deck in the room, but I think it's solid. That's about where I would put everything. I think that this is all pretty accurate in my mind. I think the big standouts is like, most people probably think that this belongs down here. I think keep giving Solar a chance, keep working on it, because this deck is actually crazy. Like it really feels good. I think Windburn definitely good. I think it like favorably trades into these two decks, but can maybe struggle with fives. I think that fives is like, I think fives does go in the good deck pile, but I think that over time it's gonna trickle down to the solid tier, because I think that Nexus thing is just a better strategy. Don't play Rock in a Hard Place. Yeah. Okay, I'm yapping too much. So like the video, comment, subscribe, and tell me why I'm wrong down below. Bye.